Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. This is your host, the Barkeep, bringing you podcast 73 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Well, guys, after a long week absence, I have finally returned to the Tavern, and along with me is somebody who had never left, unfortunately. Raptor, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, and besides, I've been keeping content coming in while you've been gone, so...
Yeah, nothing but Pokemon.
Nuh-uh.
Alright, there was the one video, and I'll get to that thing later, but...
we're definitely looking forward to your thoughts on it.
Oh, yes. I will give everybody my thoughts on the new Power Ranger movie that's coming out.
In good time.
Absolutely, because tonight, Raptor and I wanted to do a video together, and since he already gave his thoughts on the movie, we decided to do a new topic. And what we're going to go ahead and talk about is, in essence, what would Power Rangers have been had it been imported to the United States as anything other than Zyuranger. So specifically, Raptor, it's like Saban at various times attempted to bring Power Rangers over, or excuse me, Sentai over and make it to the Power Rangers. Most notably, he tried with Bioman. Later, he tried with Jetman, and eventually he succeeded with
Zyuranger.
Exactly. Now, Zyuranger became Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It became one of the most classic television shows of all time, regardless of age, range, or genre. And it's a worldwide phenomenon. And, of course, now we have a third movie coming out within 2 decades, basically, out of 21 seasons and blah, 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 blah. All that stuff.
And it's also worth noting that before Saban said...
Oh, well, we'll talk about that.
Okay, okay.
But let's talk about it in this context. I guess the thing would be is I would say Zyuranger had all the elements for the series to work. And let's just kind of say what worked about the series. One, you have, first of all, it's a dinosaur theme.
Yeah, I think that's the very most important thing. There are a lot of other things I would say are more substantial, but as for surface, superficial things...
Yeah, because, again, as we've stated before, what was the late 80s, early 90s? Denver the Last Dinosaur, Dino-Saucers, Dino Riders, Dinosaurs, I'm the Baby, Jurassic Park. All those came out. Heck, even Mario, what was the big thing they wanted to do with Mario that they could not do in the original release? They wanted him to ride a dinosaur. So we were so inundated basically with dinosaur
Let's
culture.
Remember that Power Rangers premiered in August of '93, which was 2 months after Jurassic Park had blown up theaters.
Absolutely. So what we have, because of that, I think at its core, is why Power Rangers became visually successful. Because we had a dinosaur theme and dinosaurs were all the rage. It would almost be if Power Rangers started today with a zombie/vampire theme.
Oh, dude, that'd be awesome.
No, it wouldn't, but you get my point.
Come on, Power Rangers fighting zombies? That'd be great.
Didn't they technically already do that a number of times? Just not human zombies.
All right. Oh, yeah.
All right. So we have to point out that one of the contributing factors was the dinosaur theme. Now, I would say the second biggest contributor was the detail in which everything was done. Now, here's the thing about the Sentais up until that point.
Yes.
As previously stated, Zyuranger was the first real attempt of a fantasy Sentai. Because both the heroes and the villains use magic, use spells, there's a lot of mythology to it.
There had been teams that were themed around mystical creatures or legendary creatures, but their backstories didn't really embrace it.
Absolutely. Now, the point I'm getting to is all the previous ones were based on technology, and their designs indicated that. What's really interesting when you look at Zyuranger gear, Zords, and everything else, even down to the costumes of the villains, there's a lot of fantasy elements that's thrown into it. And I think that fantasy element to it, other than just technology and dinosaurs, it's a weird blend is what you got. I mean, because again, dinosaurs, robots, magic, technology, all these things thrown in. And look at the design of the weapons. Very fantasy-like when you actually kind of break it down. They're not really like lightsabers or other technological weapons.
You know, axes and a very flashy bow and...
Yeah, and even the dragon dagger is, in a sense, a fantasy weapon. A flute that calls a mythical beast.
Yeah, and, well, heck, the Sword of Darkness, that's a very fantasy-looking weapon.
Absolutely, even its name is very fantasy. So
well, I don't know what the Zyuranger name was, but...
But, nevertheless.
Yeah.
And so the fact of the matter is that it had a great fantasy element to it, and let's be honest, the late 80s was kind of in that transition between the dark fantasy, Dungeons & Dragons, Flight of the Dragons kind of thing. It went into more of the dinosaur theme in a way.
Yeah.
So it was kind of
Weird
ducktailing on that. It was Power Rangers in that sense was kind of trapped or in the transition between the sword and sorcery into the genetic dinosaur thing.
Yeah,
and now we almost have a kind of reversal of that because now we have the whole thing with fantasy, you know, like Lord of the Rings when that came out, and that was kind of a resurgence. So it's all in cycles, and I think Power Rangers hit the right stride. Now, okay, and the third thing I want to point out, we'll start making comparisons and all that. The third thing is the design of the Zords.
Yes.
If you look at everything prior to Zyuranger, and you take a look at Zyuranger, don't even consider Dioranger or anything that came later down the line.
Yes.
Look at Zyuranger alone. Look at how intricate the detail is of the Zords, the shape of the Zords, and the movement that they have.
And how they're all very distinct from each other.
Absolutely, because prior to that, look at Live Man, which I believe was the first attempt to do animals.
Yeah.
Or not individuals, but just animal-based. Look how blocky they are. Look how round the dolphin is. And even the bull and the rhino, it's like based off of tanks or big rigs or whatever and stuff. They don't really look like animals. The dinosaurs or the guardian beast look straight up like animals, and they're really good. I mean, I swear that was some great model work back then, and that just kind of added to it. Just the design of the Zords, the Dragon Zord being iconic, the Megazord, which I think, I don't know what it is in Sentai, but I would say it's got to be one of those just iconic robots, you know?
Well, did you ever watch Go Busters versus Gokaiger?
Yeah, I saw that. And then they did.
Yeah, because Daizujin, as it's known as the Dio Megazord is known in Sentai, was there. It's just such a well done, iconic mecha.
Absolutely. So I think starting the groundwork, the three things that I think made Power Rangers successful, just being based on the Zyuranger footage. There are other things that made Power Rangers successful, but because of the time in which it came out, the dinosaur, the fantasy inspiration, and the Zords themselves is what sold the show. Now, let's rewind to a year earlier to that, to around 91, 92.
Jetman.
Saban wanted to do Jetman. That was kind of his big thing. And why wouldn't he? Jetman was a big deal in Japan at the time.
I think he was just focused on Sentai in general. So
but also, I mean, it's...
Yeah, it was very,
if you can
popular.
sell to the executives, this is the most popular television show in Japan right now, much easier for you.
Exactly.
But Raptor, in your mind, just look at the aesthetics of Jetman, because we know the story would have changed. I highly doubt of what you know of Jetman, because you watched all the episodes, and what I know,
Jetman, by the way,
and what I know of my research, it seems obvious to me they would have not used those storylines, just given the way television was at the time, and frankly still is. Just going off the aesthetics, again, the suits, the combat footage, the villains, the Zords, all that. Just kind of give me your overview of what you think Jetman would have brought to the table as Zyuranger would not, I guess. If anything.
If we're going to look... All right, so let's make the assumption that the plot of Power Rangers would have been the same.
Not exactly the same, but obviously similar.
Let's just say let's just say Zordon.
It would have been Zordon and 5 teenagers fighting a space witch or space warlord
probably
or something.
Some kind of space wizard if they based it on how to get it all. But let's look at Jetman aesthetically compared to Zyuranger. It just doesn't compare. While the Jetman suits are nice, I really like the helmets. They're birds.
Yeah, I mean, because, again, go back to the dinosaur thing. That was the big thing. Even though the saber-toothed tiger and the mastodon are not dinosaurs...
They're prehistoric creatures which got caught up in the dinosaur craze.
Exactly. So, to go into a studio or anybody to sell them on birds is going to be hard enough as it is. And let's also point out that G-Force, which was based on Gatchaman,
yes,
was also in syndication at that time. So I wonder if that had anything to do with it as well.
And that could have been. They could have said, well,
that could have been.
This thing wasn't a huge hit, and this is just birds again.
But at the time, when he's pitching, Zyuranger's obviously on the air. And if you had to choose between birds and dinosaurs, well...
Yeah, now let's look at the mecha, because that was a huge factor in Power Rangers merchandising success.
Absolutely. The toy sales were big. Even back then, even though it was simple stuff back then, it was just the figures and the weapons, blah, 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 and all that.
Yeah, and so while each Jetman had their individual mecha, they're not that different from each other. They're all jets.
Yes,
with that,
and not even good jets. I mean, if you compare that to some Decepticon toys, they're not much better, to be honest. Now, I will admit the designs of the mecha, like in the robot forms, are okay, but they're pretty plain.
Yeah. And Jet Icarus doesn't look as cool as Daizujin.
And I think what it was is that, of course, Jetman is focused more on story than it is for its Zords, whereas in Zyuranger, the Zords are sentient, so a lot of the plot revolves around them.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, at times, Jetman's aesthetic was not that hot. As I was explaining to you before we did the podcast, there's a group that come in for a few episodes called the Neo Jetmen. Their suits are terrible. Their helmets are vaguely okay, but the fact that they don't close all the way makes them just look ridiculous. And then there was the alternate universe Jetmen. Again, didn't look that good.
Yeah, as far as villains are concerned, that was kind of another thing that probably the series had going against it, at least for translation.
Yeah, and also there were several episodes which had minimal monster presence.
Absolutely, because again, they're focused more on character stories than what Zyuranger was trying to focus on, which was more of that mystical, knights and swords kind of thing in a Japanese setting.
Yeah,
which sounds awesome.
And while the monsters of Jetman are alright, so my favorite episode, Jetman, doesn't feature a monster fight. There's a new character, but there's no regular monster.
And I'm going to say this too, because when we go to that fantasy element as well, look at all the monsters that Zyuranger had compared to everything that came before. Because one of the complaints I have about monsters nowadays is that first of all, they lack a specific theme, which was present within the first few seasons of Power Rangers, definitely present within Zyuranger. It's really hard to tell. They're not iconic. They're not distinct. They'll just kind of like mesh together. And the thing about Zyurangers is that their monsters look at Pudgy Pig. Look how iconic that damn thing is. It's a pig head with 2 arms and a battle helmet. Heck, it would be a Pokemon nowadays if it wasn't already designed.
Yeah, they're based on like mythical monsters, but also monsters of pop culture.
Yeah, they had the Frankenstein monster, and then I always like things like they're easy to remember. Dora Pig, Dora Sphinx, which is another thing. It's like they're just easy to remember because of their motif. But much like Spider-Man villains, I guess.
Yeah, and so let's rewind to Jetman for a moment.
Okay. We keep... it's like compare and contrast, because I've seen Jetman villains, and to be honest, they're not really spectacular. They are a little bit more grotesque. But beyond
So plot-wise, there are 2 distinct groups of Jetman monsters.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Dimension Beasts, which are... They're mutated... They're mutated everyday objects.
Okay.
In fact, my favorite monster from Sentai is a Dimension Beast. It's a cup of ramen that got mutated into a monster.
Interesting.
But then come the biodimension beasts, in which it fuses an animal and a piece of technology into a monster. And so there are things like Sniper Cat, which is a cat with a reticle attached to its eye and like a gun arm.
Okay, well, they're obviously based on technology and modern day things. Now, Sniper is probably a no-no for censorship.
Anyways, a lot of those.
Yeah.
This whole thing about mixing animals with technology, it's just kind of a messy. The designs were often kind of messy, and really, they probably would have blended into a lot of the the over-violent crap of the 80s, especially stuff that was going on in comics at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that
the monsters of Zyuranger were definitely a breath of fresh air compared to other things that were coming out in the 80s.
And that's the thing I'll say about Zyuranger is that, again, if you look at it just up to Zyuranger, it is a break in almost every conceivable sense from what was traditionally Sentai at that point, which I don't know how much it lends itself to Power Rangers being successful, but it definitely gave it a different look that they capitalized on that you could not otherwise get with the other franchises. Right. That being said, before he did Jetman, Saban's first known attempt that we know of was Bioman, which, even though you and I like the suits, let's be honest, that's very... If you bring into an American cultural context at that time, which was mid-'80s, very generic, very plain, and dare I say, bootleg dime store type of image.
I think it would have gotten lost in the shuffle of Transformers and Voltron.
Especially since it was a live-action show, and just what you were kind of doing at the time. Because, yeah, I mean, let's say, for the sake of argument, because I don't know when everything was developed and everything came out, but Bioman, Transformers, and G.I. Joe, it all came out the same year. Let's assume that that was the case. Would Bioman have legitimately survived? Because, keep in mind, the beauty of G.I. Joe Transformers is it's a cast of thousands. It's almost like a Roland Emmerich film.
Yeah.
Bioman would not necessarily fit that mold. Yes, it can change every year, but not to the degree of what Transformers and G.I. Joe were able to do at the time. And heck, even later in the 80s with My Little Pony and all that, the G1 ponies, their merchandising.
It was like Star Wars. Everyone could have a favorite character.
Absolutely, and in Bioman, unfortunately, you'd be restricted.
Bioman suits, while they each have a different color, they weren't visually distinct enough. And so, again, let's go back to Zyuranger. Each suit, while they all have the same basic theme, each helmet is very different.
Absolutely.
Very distinct. You will not, under no circumstance will you confuse one Ranger's helmet for another, even if you took the color away.
Absolutely, and that's something that definitely works for Power Rangers and Zyuranger, and to the degree Jetman.
It lets everyone have their favorite Ranger, even if there's just 5, later 6 of them.
Absolutely, and I think the problem with Bioman is, 1, the time in which it came out would have been an issue, and 2, it's just overall general aesthetic.
Yeah, the aesthetic is not as nice as Zyuranger.
Now, recently, we've discovered information that in the 1970s, Stan Lee over at Marvel, who at the time had licensed rights to Japanese stuff and was bringing Spider-Man over to Japan.
At the time, Marvel was...
They were working with
Toei, because
Toei.
They worked together on the Spider-Man series, but Marvel also had a hand in producing... Battle Fever J, Sun Vulcan.
And what Stan Lee had attempted to do, or at least his company attempted to do... Dynamite, was to actually bring Sun Vulcan over to the United States. Now, this is an era before you and I would have known what's going on there. I mean, we know our comic history and television history, I think, well enough to speculate on a few things. I just wonder how successful it would have been as a television show in the 70s, concerning the other Marvel properties at the time that were live action. Hulk, Wonder Woman. Well, Wonder Woman was DC, so.
But still, it would have been competition.
Yeah, you know what I mean, like the 70s superhero.
This may sound weird, but I think Sun Vulcan at its time would have been more potentially successful than Bioman would have been at its time.
That I would agree with.
Just because the 80s sci-fi boom had not kicked off yet.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're not in an era of syndication in television just yet. And syndication also played a big deal in what was going on with Power Rangers, because we're talking about 60 episodes, which they ran like 5 days a week, nonstop for a year and a half, basically.
Exactly.
But the thing with Sun Vulcan, which I find interesting, which could have led to its popularity, is the fact that it had Marvel tie-in. Now, stay with me here for a moment.
Okay, hit me.
Stan Lee brings Sun Vulcan over to the United States. I think no matter what level of popularity it had, somebody would have found it interesting.
Of course, yeah.
And somewhere down the line, they would have gotten into the mainstream Marvel continuity through the comics. Yeah. Because I can see Sun Vulcan having developed into a comic series under the Marvel brand. Because look at Brute Force, for crying out loud, or some of those other things that Linkara reviews that's actually part of. I mean, heck, Bill and Ted is technically part of Marvel canon on their comics.
In less egregious examples, Transformers got integrated into the Marvel universe.
Exactly. So that's kind of the point and all that. So I wonder what popularity...
This came over the Marvel copyright, not something that Marvel's just adapting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question would be is what popularity could Sun Vulcan have had in the comics, and would we be here talking today about Avengers 2 with Vol Panther in it?
You know, what could have happened, maybe, is that maybe their popularity could have overtaken the series, because they could have kept going in comics after after they ran out of Sun Vulcan footage.
Yeah.
And maybe that would have kept Sentai from coming to America, just the fact that Sun Vulcan could have continued on in comics.
And Marvel would have kept the copyright.
And that they would have been... that these Super Sentai heroes would be better known today as Marvel superheroes instead of a distinct television show.
Absolutely. And
I
guess
Power Rangers could have never been.
I think we can do a whole thing about the Sun Vulcan thing and speculation on that, because there's so many possibilities with the time of Marvel and Stan Lee backing it.
It's such a different time.
Absolutely, and also different mediums is what we're talking about. And you know, let's be honest, Stan Lee, I think on any given day and any given era has more sway than Han Saban.
Yeah, but also Stan Lee is primarily a storyteller.
Absolutely.
So that would have been a different spin.
So I think what we're getting away from, because I think it's fun to speculate about these things, especially when we have a lot of facts to back up a lot of this stuff, is would you say, Raptor? Let's put it this way. Is Zyuranger footage primarily responsible for the popularity of Power Rangers, or could you have done it with any of those properties and still got similar results?
I think it had to be Zyuranger footage. As compared, at least, I can't compare Zyuranger. You would be better to compare there. But comparing to Jetman, if we're taking out all those cool out-of-suit character story moments from Jetman, other than some occasionally cool fights, there's not a lot left. Zyuranger just has so much more going for it aesthetically. But let's talk about footage and plot.
In what sense?
In the bit of Zyuranger footage that worked incredibly well for both franchises. The Sixth Ranger.
That is something that, up until Zyuranger, was lacking. Now, there had been 6 characters, and
Johnny-come-latelys who...
There have been characters analogous, but the first official 6th Ranger was Dragon Ranger in Zyuranger. Now, let's not kid ourselves. a lot of the popularity of Power Rangers came once they did the Green with Evil saga. Tommy was introduced. The Dragon Zord was introduced. It was literally a game changer and made Jason Frank the breakout character of the series.
And Burai was a breakout character of Zyuranger.
Absolutely, because, the thing is, I haven't watched, I've watched the first episode of Zyuranger. I haven't watched the entire series. But it has been my understanding, at least from the American fans, that it wasn't a very popular show. Now, whether they mean that they didn't think it was popular or...
I'll clarify that for you.
Okay, go ahead.
It was very popular amongst kids. However, it was not as popular amongst older fans. Older fans adored Jetman, but they loathed Zyuranger.
Okay. I think I lost my point here.
You weren't sure... about Zyuranger's popularity before Burai.
Yeah, because I don't know if Burai and Dragon Ranger saved that show, although what I know of the plot involving him sounds very good, at least in the summation that I got.
There were ratings improvements, and there was also merchandising improvements.
Oh, no doubt. You put the Dragon Zord out there, or Dragon Caesar.
And toy sales were already good going into Zyuranger.
Absolutely. Nonetheless, I do think that helped pick up both series. The question would be and let's go to a Jetman example, what would be the game changer for Jetman be if it was adapted to Power Rangers? Because consider for the moment, let's play this game.
Okay.
Let's say Jetman was the adaptation of Power Rangers and just about everything else was the same. Okay, instead of Rita, it's either a male character, female character, somebody in a suit probably, and all that mixing footage. But you have Jason as Red Hawk. I think they would have made Billy Yellow Owl because he's kind of analogous to that character.
Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah, you could have set him together.
Zach would end up as Black Condor, though.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that would still happen. I think they would have made Trini the Blue Ranger, and I think they would have made Kimberly the Pink Ranger.
Yeah,
so
just because Cowrie... Well, white, actually.
Oh, yeah, white. I always get mixed up because there's more pink on there, and in all those late 80s, early 90s Sentai, it gets mixed up.
White Swallow... No, it was Blue. It was White Swan.
White Swan,
She
Blue
was
Swallow.
the only one that had pink sleeves. Everyone else had white sleeves.
Yes.
Including Blue Swallow, which is weird.
Yeah. Weird aesthetic thing. So we got that cast. The thing is, you would have to do one of two things with Power Rangers with the Jetman footage. Either A, you actually have to develop the characters, because as we've talked about, there's kind of a lack in footage that Zyuranger would provide you, whether that be Six Ranger, action, whatever and stuff, or you have to develop your own footage. Because let's remember, Saban right now is Zyuranger footage and call them up and say, hey, we need more, and Toei made more for them.
Mm-hmm.
So the question would be would Power Rangers have lasted as long as they did with the Jetman footage because of those limitations?
You have to think, would it have been a hit? Because Saban was only able to commission those extra episodes because Power Rangers had been such an incredible hit.
Absolutely. And again, it was until around the 20s.
To go back to your game changer statement.
Yeah.
That was a very distinct visual game changer for Zyuranger when the Sixth Ranger arrived.
Yeah.
He was participating in fights. The fights, you couldn't look at a fight from later in the series and confuse it with a fight earlier in the series. Most of the game changers in Jetman were behind the scenes. The villains were squabbling with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they were switching in and out of power. But the monsters pretty much stayed the same. And there was no new Rangers. There were the Neo Jetmen, the alternate dimension Jetmen, but they didn't stick around. They didn't stay.
Yeah, and I think what I'm getting to is that the game...
So there wasn't a visual game changer, yes.
Yeah, the game changer would have to be quality in the story because, again, as much as we both enjoy the original Mighty Morphin, take out the Green Ranger, and what do you really have for those first 60 episodes? And Linkara, again, made a great point in his review of the series. He's like, I'm sorry I keep on harping on Tommy, but his character causes the most change in the series.
He's the only one that advances the plot. He's the only one who has anything happen to him.
Yeah, so heaven forbid you should actually write characters in your show about people.
Yeah, and that's what Jetman was all about.
And that's what I worry about because, again, as much as I like the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, I don't see them sustain themselves without having a Sixth Ranger come in. And not only a Sixth Ranger, but a Sixth Ranger starts out as an antagonist.
Yeah, that's riding right on the 90s anti-hero wave.
Yeah, which I believe that kind of started right with Venom and all that, and then Image Comics took that up and their stuff and all that.
The villain who gets roped into heroic things, you know. He was like the Power Rangers Wolverine, or their Venom, or even kind of like Batman, but not entirely.
I get what you're saying here and all that. You know, let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and institute the last call directive.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think we keep getting a little off subject. But I think,
we're kind of going in circles.
Yeah, but I haven't talked about Power Rangers in over a week. Well, technically I have, but it hasn't been pretty. Anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I'm going to go ahead and make the point that Power Rangers was the perfect storm. It was a culmination of the right time, the right people, and the right set of circumstances, and the right footage that they could get the rights to. That's what made it successful on an aesthetic level, because you had that look that was distinct. There was nothing else on television. Even today, there isn't anything on television that looks like what that looked like, and what Power Rangers looks like now. Because, I mean, again, how many live-action television shows are there out there about superheroes? I mean, not many.
None aimed at kids.
Yeah. Most of it's in animation still. I mean, to be live-action, even at that...
There's be a little more heroic action in live-action TV, but it's aimed at adults.
Yeah, but I mean, even back then, I mean, look, what was the Fox Kids line? Batman, the animated series, the Animaniacs, the Tiny Toons, then Power Rangers. I mean, Power Rangers was like the only live-action show on there until VR Troopers, and that's another discussion for another day.
Oh yeah, that'd be a fun one when we get to it.
But Raptor, I mean, would you tend to agree with my sentiment?
Yeah, it had to be Zyuranger. If it wasn't Zyuranger, if it would have been Jetman, Ranger, Bioman, I think it probably would have been fondly remembered. I think it would have been a cult hit at best.
Probably so. I mean, I could see maybe Ranger lasting a little bit longer than the others because of its aesthetics, but Zyuranger, again, just because of where we were at that time, what was going on with other pop culture like Jurassic Park and all that.
Oh, I'm sure Haim Saban was just smiling so big when he saw those box office numbers from Jurassic Park.
Heck, I think as soon as he knew that Spielberg was doing a Jurassic Park movie, he's like,
I'm going ahead with the Zoo.
Yeah, and you know what? I guarantee you that was also a studio decision. They're like, you know what? Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Because
forget those birds.
Exactly. So, well, Raptor, I want to thank you for joining me again. It's been a treat to come back here.
Talking with you again.
Absolutely. And
whenever I talk with Trias, we just agree on everything.
Well, I think we kind of agreed a little bit here today, but I'd like to know what all of our subscribers out there think. If you guys think that they could have done it without Zyuranger, or you think Zyuranger was the only thing at that time that could have done it, hey, let us know. We'd be very interested in your comments.
And also, if you're one of the Pokemon fans listening to this, we are still doing our giveaway for a shiny, perfect IV, Mew, and Ditto. It's also foreign. So check out our Facebook page for more details on that.
Absolutely. But until next time, Raptor, I want to thank you for joining me. Thank you all for listening. Have a good evening. And the tavern is now closed.